The knife pressed against Rose's throat as Clara faced the most horrifying choice of her life, her dignity or her sister's blood. In that suffocating back room of Dalton's saloon, evil wore a familiar face, and salvation seemed as distant as the stars. But outside, a lone rancher named Samuel Kane heard a cry that would resurrect ghosts he'd buried with his daughter. Welcome to Redemption Creek, where justice arrives not from badges, but from broken men who've lost everything except their aim. Stay with me until the end and comment your city below. I want to know how far this story of courage travels tonight. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Redemption Creek, a town that wore its scars like badges of shame. Dust devils danced between weathered buildings, and the few souls brave enough to venture onto Main Street kept their heads down, eyes averted from Dalton's saloon, the festering wound at the heart of their community. Inside that saloon's back room, where sunlight feared to tread, two sisters huddled against rough wooden walls. Clara Morrison, 23, with hair the color of autumn wheat, tried to shield her younger sister Rose, barely 17, whose tears had long since dried into salt trails on her freckled cheeks. The rope binding their wrists had rubbed their skin raw, each movement sending fresh waves of pain up their arms. "Please," Claire's voice cracked like drought-stricken earth. "She's just a child. Let her go." Jack Dalton lounged in a chair across from them, cleaning his fingernails with a Bowie knife that caught what little light filtered through the grimy window. He was a man who'd grown fat on other people's misery, his belly straining against a silk vest that spoke of ill-gotten gains. His eyes cold as river stones flickered between the sisters, with the calculating gaze of a snake choosing which mouse to swallow first. "A child." Dalton's laugh was gravel and phlegm. "Old enough to work off her daddy's debts, I'd say." He stood the floorboards groaning under his weight and moved closer. The smell of whiskey and tobacco preceded him like a toxic cloud. "Your old man thought he could cheat me at cards. Thought he was clever. He's dead." Clara spat, finding courage in her desperation. "Isn't that payment enough?" "Dead men don't pay debts, sweetheart." Dalton traced the flat of his blade along Rose's jawline, making the girl whimper. "But pretty daughters, they're worth their weight in gold to the right buyers." The door creaked open and Pike Garrison slithered in Dalton's enforcer, a man so thin he looked like death had already claimed him once and spat him back out. His hand rested on the pearl handle of his revolver, fingers drumming a nervous rhythm that everyone in town had learned to fear. "Boss, Pike's voice was reedy like wind through a broken fence. "That rancher Kane, he's been asking questions in town about the girls." Dalton's expression darkened. "Samuel Kane needs to mind his own business. Man's got nothing left to lose makes him dangerous." "Makes him stupid," Pike corrected with a yellow-toothed grin. Outside, unbeknownst to the men in that room of shadows and sin, Samuel Kane stood at the saloon's back entrance, his weathered hand pressed against the sun-bleached wood. He'd come to town for supplies, nothing more, but Clara's muffled cry had stopped him cold, a sound too familiar, too much like another voice that haunted his dreams. Samuel was 62, but the years sat on him like centuries. His face was a map of sorrow lines, etched by loss and guilt, that no amount of whiskey could wash away. 3 years ago, his daughter Emma had made a similar cry, and he'd been too far away too late. The image of her broken body was burned into his retinas, appearing every time he closed his eyes. But he wasn't too late now. Inside, Dalton had moved closer to Clara, his thick fingers tangling in her hair. "Here's the deal, darling. You can make this easy or you can make it hard. But either way, you're going to learn what happens to families that cross Jack Dalton." "Please," Rose sobbed, struggling against her bonds. "Please, we'll do anything. We'll work. We'll—" "Shut her up!" Dalton barked at Pike, who backhanded the girl with casual cruelty. Rose's head snapped back, blood blooming from her split lip. Something savage awakened in Clara's eyes. "You touch her again, and I'll—" "You'll what?" Dalton pressed the knife against Rose's throat, just hard enough to dimple the skin. "Choose Clara, right now. You can save your sister, but it's going to cost you everything you've been holding on to. That pretty dignity of yours. That's the price." The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as Clara looked at her sister's terrified face. Rose was all she had left in this world, Their parents dead, their farm seized, their hope extinguished like a candle in a storm. "Don't," Rose whispered through her bloodied lips. "Clara, don't." But Clara was already breaking, crumbling like sun-baked clay. Her fingers moved to the buttons of her dress with the mechanical movements of surrender. "I'll do it," she whispered, each word a nail in the coffin of her soul. "I'll do whatever you want. Just, please let her go." Dalton's grin was triumphant, the expression of a man who'd never known defeat. "Smart girl, see Pike. I told you the pretty ones always break easier." Clara's fingers trembled on the third button when the back door exploded inward with such force it bounced off the wall. Samuel Kane stood silhouetted in the doorway, afternoon sun blazing behind him like righteous fire. His duster coat billowed in the wind and his hand rested on the worn grip of his Colt .45. A gun that had tasted blood before and remembered the flavor. "Step away from those girls." Samuel's voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of mountains. Dalton spun his knife, still pressed to Rose's throat. "Well, well. Samuel Kane, the ghost of Redemption Creek. Come to play hero. I said, step away." Samuel took a measured step into the room, his spurs singing a metallic song against the floorboards. His eyes, gray as storm clouds, never left Dalton's. "Won't ask again." Pike's hand twitched toward his gun, but Samuel's gaze flicked to him just for a heartbeat, and Pike froze. Everyone knew the stories. Samuel Kane had been a Texas Ranger before he'd become a rancher, before he'd become a grieving father. His draw was legendary, his aim divine. "You're outnumbered, old man," Dalton sneered, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead. "2 against 1, and I've got a knife to this pretty little throat." "You've got 3 seconds to remove that knife," Samuel said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled the room. 3. Clara watched this stranger, this savior who'd appeared from nowhere, and saw something in his eyes she recognized. Loss, rage, a need for redemption that matched her own desperate hope. "You won't risk the girl," Dalton said, pressing the blade harder. A thin line of red appeared on Rose's neck. 2. Pike's nerve broke first. His hand darted for his gun, but Samuel's Colt cleared leather faster than thought. The gun roared, and Pike's revolver went spinning across the room, his hand a bloody ruin. Pike screamed, dropping to his knees, cradling his mangled fingers. Samuel's gun swung back to Dalton. Smoke still wisping from the barrel. 1. The room held its breath. Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear Rose's rattled breathing, could hear the universe balanced on the edge of a knife, literally and figuratively. "You think you're some kind of hero." Dalton's voice had lost its swagger fear, creeping in at the edges. "You think saving these whores will bring back your dead daughter?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Samuel's face, already hard, became something carved from stone. "Her name was Emma," he said slowly, each word precise as a bullet. "She was 16. Men like you took her. Men like you broke her. Men like you left her in a ditch to die alone." His thumb pulled back the hammer of his Colt with a click that sounded like Judgment Day. "But Emma's dead and these girls aren't. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop that knife. You're going to untie those girls. And then you're going to walk out of here and never come back." "This is my town," Dalton roared. "Was," Samuel corrected. "Was your town." They stood frozen in that tableau, the fat man with his knife, the old gunslinger with his ghosts, the sisters caught between salvation and damnation. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight streaming through the door, each one a tiny world spinning through space, indifferent to the human drama below. Then Rose did something that changed everything. She looked directly at Samuel and said, "Please, mister, I don't want to die." 3 words. That's all it took. 3 words in a voice so young, so afraid, so much like Emma's that last day when she'd begged him not to leave for that cattle drive. Samuel's finger tightened on the trigger. "Drop the knife." Maybe it was the absolute certainty in Samuel's voice. Maybe it was the way his gun hand never wavered, steady as bedrock. Or maybe Dalton finally recognized that he was looking at a man who had nothing left to lose, the most dangerous kind of man there was. The knife clattered to the floor. "Pike," Dalton said through gritted teeth. "Cut them loose!" Pike, still whimpering over his ruined hand, fumbled with his left hand for a smaller knife and sawed through the ropes binding the sisters. They collapsed into each other's arms, Clara pulling Rose against her chest, both of them sobbing with relief. "Now get out," Samuel said. "Both of you." Dalton's face was purple with rage and humiliation. "This isn't over, Kane. You just signed your death warrant." "I signed that 3 years ago," Samuel replied. "Been waiting for someone to collect." Dalton helped Pike to his feet, and they stumbled toward the front of the saloon. At the doorway, Dalton turned back. "Those girls are mine by law. Their father owed me—" Samuel's gun barked again, the bullet splintering the doorframe an inch from Dalton's head. "Their father's debts died with him. You come near these girls again, you'll join him." After they left, Samuel stood for a long moment, his gun still raised, as if expecting them to return. Finally, slowly, he holstered the Colt and turned to the sisters. Clara had rebuttoned her dress and was examining the cut on Rose's neck, shallow, thank God. Both girls looked at him with a mixture of awe and fear, unable to reconcile this gray-haired rancher with the force of nature they'd just witnessed. "Can you walk?" Samuel asked gruffly. They nodded. "Then let's go. My wagon's out front. You're coming to my ranch." "We can't," Clara started. "We don't want to cause you any more trouble." "Trouble's already here," Samuel said. "Might as well face it together." They made their way through the saloon, past overturned tables and scattered cards, past men who averted their eyes and pretended they hadn't heard the gunshots. The entire town had become expert at not seeing, not hearing, not knowing what went on in Dalton's back rooms. But Samuel had seen, Samuel had heard, and Samuel had acted. His wagon waited outside, loaded with supplies. Flour, coffee, ammunition. He helped the girls up, noting how they flinched at his touch, how they huddled together like wounded birds. "My ranch is 5 miles north," he said, climbing onto the driver's seat. "It's not much, but it's safe. Has been for 3 years anyway." As they rolled out of town, Clara found her voice. Why did you help us?" Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring at the road ahead, he said, "Because 3 years ago I didn't. I was in Denver selling cattle, making money. My daughter needed me and I wasn't there. Can't change that. Can't bring Emma back. But I could walk through that door today. I could draw that gun. I could do for you what I couldn't do for her." "We're grateful," Rose whispered, her voice hoarse. "So grateful." "Don't be grateful yet," Samuel warned. "Dalton won't let this go. He's got pride, and wounded pride makes men stupid and vicious. He'll come." "Then we'll run," Clara said. "No." Samuel's voice was firm. "Running's what I did for 3 years. Running from the guilt, from the memories, from the man I used to be. But running doesn't change anything. It just makes you tired." The ranch, when they reached it, was exactly what Samuel had said, not much but safe. A simple 2-story house with a wraparound porch, a barn that had seen better days, and a small corral where 2 horses grazed. The mountains rose in the distance, purple and majestic, standing sentinel over this little piece of earth Samuel had carved out for himself and his ghosts. He showed them inside to a room that had belonged to Emma. It still smelled faintly of lavender. Her clothes still hung in the wardrobe, her books still lined the shelves. "You can stay here," he said awkwardly. "There's a lock on the door if that helps you feel safer." Clara touched one of the dresses hanging in the wardrobe, blue gingham carefully preserved. This was hers. "Emma loved that dress," Samuel said softly. "Said it made her feel like she could fly." "What happened to her, Buzz?" Rose asked. Then immediately covered her mouth. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't." "It's all right." Samuel sat heavily in a chair by the window. "She deserves to be remembered to have her story told." He stared out at the setting sun painting the mountains gold and red. "Emma was headstrong, full of life. Wanted to see the world beyond this valley. When I left for that cattle drive, she begged to come. I said no, too dangerous for a young girl." He laughed bitterly. "Dangerous. I thought the danger was out there on the trail, but it was here in town. Some of Dalton's men, drunk and mean, saw her at the general store, followed her. She tried to run, tried to make it home, but—" His voice broke, and for a moment the strong man who'd faced down Dalton was just a broken father drowning in guilt. They found her by Miller's Creek. Doc said she'd fought. Emma always was a fighter, but she was just one girl against 3 grown men. By the time I got back from Denver, she'd been in the ground a week. Clara moved without thinking, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Samuel looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. I knew what kind of men lived in this town. I knew Dalton was poison spreading his rot, but I thought if I kept my head down, minded my own business, we'd be safe. I was a coward. You're not a coward, Rose said firmly. A coward wouldn't have walked into that room today. Samuel studied the girls, these strangers who'd somehow become his responsibility, his chance at redemption. You should know what you're getting into staying here. Dalton owns the sheriff. He's got maybe a dozen men who'll do whatever he says for the right price. He owns debts on half the farms in the valley. This won't end with today. Then what do? Clara asked. We get ready, Samuel said, standing. We prepare. And when he comes, and he will come, we make our stand. That night, as the sisters lay in Emma's bed, wearing Emma's nightgown, surrounded by Emma's things, Clara whispered into the darkness, Do you think we're safe here? Rose was quiet for a moment. I think he'll die protecting us. That's what I'm afraid of, Clara admitted. He's already lost so much. Maybe, Rose said, maybe that's why he needs to save us. Not for us, but for himself. Meanwhile, Samuel sat on his porch rifle across his lap, watching the road. The moon was full, casting silver light across the valley, and every shadow could hide a threat. But for the first time in 3 years, the weight on his chest had lessened just a fraction. He'd acted. He'd chosen to be the man he should have been, even if it was too late for Emma. In town, Dalton raged in his saloon, his pride wounded worse than Pike's hand. He gathered his men, promised them gold, promised them blood. The humiliation burned in his gut like acid. Kane thinks he's untouchable, Dalton snarled, downing another whiskey. Thinks his reputation will protect him. But every man bleeds, every man breaks, and when we're done with him, we'll take those girls and show this whole town what happens when you cross Jack Dalton. Pike, his hand wrapped in bloody bandages, grinned through his pain. When do we ride? Tomorrow night, Dalton decided. Let him think he's won. Let him relax. Then we'll remind him that this is my town, and in my town I am God. But Dalton had made a crucial mistake, one that would cost him everything. He thought Samuel Kane was just an old rancher playing hero. He didn't know that Samuel had spent 20 years as a Texas Ranger tracking men far worse than Dalton across desert and mountain. He didn't know that Samuel had nothing left to lose except this one chance at redemption. And he didn't know that in Clara and Rose Morrison. Samuel had found something he thought he'd lost forever, a reason to fight, a reason to stand, a reason to be the man he'd once been. The next morning dawned clear and bright, but Samuel could smell trouble on the wind. He'd learned to trust his instincts over the years, and they were screaming at him now. He found the girls in the kitchen, Clara attempting to make breakfast with the supplies she'd found. You don't have to do that, he said. We want to earn our keeps, Clara replied, not meeting his eyes. We're not charity cases. Never said you were. Samuel poured himself coffee, black and bitter, the way Emma used to tease him about. But you're guests, not servants. Guests leave, Rose said quietly. We don't have anywhere to go. Samuel studied them over his cup. In daylight, he could see the bruises on their wrists from the ropes, the exhaustion in their eyes, the way they startled at every small sound. They were broken birds, but not beyond repair. Then stay, he said simply. This house has been too quiet for too long. Clara finally met his gaze. Dalton will come for us. You know that. I'm counting on it. You can't fight them all alone, Clara protested. It's suicide. Samuel smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Maybe, but there are different kinds of death, Miss Morrison. I've been dying slowly for 3 years. At least this way it'll mean something. Before Clara could respond, the sound of hoofbeats reached them. Samuel was at the window, instantly rifle in hand. But it wasn't Dalton's men. It was a single rider moving fast. Samuel recognized him as Tom Bradley, who owned the general store in town. A good man, one of the few who hadn't been completely cowed by Dalton. Tom dismounted, breathing hard. Sam, he gasped, you need to know. Dalton's gathering men. He's put a bounty on your head, $500 dead or alive. He's planning to ride out here tonight with at least a dozen guns. I figured as much, Samuel said calmly. That's not all, Tom continued. He's sent word to Fort Collins to some gunfighters he knows there. Professional killers. They'll be here by week's end. Clara gasped, and Rose grabbed her sister's hand, but Samuel just nodded. Thank you for the warning, Tom. Warning? Tom stared at him incredulously. Sam, you need to run. Take the girls and run. Head for Denver, or better yet, California. Get as far from here as you can. No. The single word hung in the air like a challenge to fate itself. Sam, please, Tom pleaded. Emma wouldn't want you to die for strangers. Emma's dead, Samuel said quietly. What she would or wouldn't want stopped mattering the day Dalton's men put her in the ground. This isn't about Emma anymore. It's about doing what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Tom looked at the sisters, then back at Samuel. You're all insane. You're going to die here. Maybe, Samuel admitted, but we'll die standing. That's more than most folks in this town can say. Tom shook his head, mounted his horse, and rode away. But Samuel noticed he headed back toward town, not toward his ranch. Tom Bradley might not fight, but he wouldn't run either. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Samuel showed the girls how to load rifles, how to barricade windows, how to move through the house without presenting a target. They were quick learners, driven by desperation and a growing trust in this strange, sad man who'd become their protector. As the sun began to set, painting the sky the color of blood, Samuel made his final preparations. He positioned rifles at strategic windows, loaded every gun he owned, and filled buckets with water in case Dalton tried to burn them out. There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen, he told the sisters. If things go bad, you get down there and don't come out no matter what you hear. We're not hiding while you fight, Clara said stubbornly. You'll do what I tell you, Samuel replied sharply. Then softer, please. I couldn't save Emma. Let me save you. The first sign of riders came just after full dark dust clouds visible in the moonlight, the rumble of many horses. Samuel counted muzzle flashes, at least 15 men, maybe more. They stopped just outside rifle range, and Dalton's voice carried across the still night air. Kane, Samuel Kane. This is your last chance. Send out the girls, and we'll let you live. You have my word. Your word isn't worth the spit it takes to say it, Samuel called back. Then you'll all die tonight, Dalton promised. Every last one of you. Samuel sighted down his rifle, finding Dalton's bulk in the moonlight. One squeeze of the trigger, and this would all be over. But that would be murder, not justice. And despite everything, Samuel Kane was not a murderer. Dalton, he called. You've got one chance to ride away. Take it. The answer came in the form of gunfire windows shattering splinters, flying as bullets tore into the house. Samuel returned fire methodically, each shot careful, measured. A man screamed and fell from his horse. Another cursed and clutched his shoulder. But they kept coming, spreading out to surround the house. Samuel moved from window to window, trying to cover all approaches, but he was one man against many. He heard footsteps on the porch, kicked over a lantern to set the curtains ablaze, using the light to spot targets. A man came through the back door, and Rose was there with a pan of boiling water, throwing it in his face. He screamed, and Clara clubbed him with a rifle butt, dropping him cold. I told you to hide, Samuel shouted. And we told you we're not hiding, Clara shouted back, taking position at a window and firing at the shapes in the darkness. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Samuel's ammunition was running low, and Dalton's men were getting closer. He could hear them on the roof now, trying to find a way in. Then, just when it seemed hopeless, new gunfire erupted, but not aimed at the house. Samuel saw muzzle flashes from the tree line, saw Dalton's men spinning in confusion, caught between two fields of fire. Tom Bradley emerged from the darkness, rifle smoking, and he wasn't alone. Behind him came other townspeople, the baker, the blacksmith, even the schoolteacher. Men and women who'd lived in fear for too long, finally finding their courage in Samuel's stand. Thought you could use some help, Sam, Tom called, dropping another of Dalton's men with a well-placed shot. The tide turned in an instant. Dalton's men, caught in a crossfire, began to retreat. Some threw down their guns and surrendered. Others fled into the night. And Dalton himself, wounded and bleeding, tried to crawl away. Samuel found him in the barn trying to saddle a horse with a bullet in his leg. Pike lay nearby, unconscious or dead. "It's over, Dalton." Samuel set his gun trained on the fat man's back. Dalton turned his face a mask of pain and hatred. "You think you've won? You think this changes anything I own this town?" "You owned fear," Samuel corrected, "and fear's a currency that loses value real quick when people stand together. You gonna murder me, Kane, add that to your conscience?" "No," Samuel said. "You're going to stand trial. Real justice, not your version of it." "There is no justice," Dalton snarled, and his hand went for a hidden derringer. Samuel's rifle cracked once. Dalton looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise replacing rage on his face. He tried to speak, but only blood came out. He fell forward into the hay and didn't move again. Samuel stood over the body for a long moment, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, just emptiness. Killing Dalton hadn't brought Emma back. It hadn't erased the guilt. It had just ended a threat, nothing more. He walked back to the house where the townspeople were gathering. The sisters ran to him, both talking at once, checking him for wounds. He was bleeding from a graze on his arm, another on his ribs, but nothing fatal. "Is it over?" Rose asked. Samuel looked at the faces around him, neighbors who'd found their courage, who'd chosen to stand instead of kneel. He thought about Emma, about the 3 years he'd spent as a ghost, about these 2 girls who'd given him a reason to be alive again. "The fighting's over," he said. "The rest, that's just beginning." In the days that followed, Redemption Creek transformed. With Dalton dead and his men scattered, people began to speak freely again. Debts were forgiven. The saloon was converted into a meeting hall. A real sheriff was appointed, Tom Bradley, who'd proven his courage when it counted. Clara and Rose Morrison stayed at Samuel's ranch, not as guests or charity cases, but as family. The house that had been silent for 3 years filled with laughter again, with cooking smells, with the simple sounds of life being lived. Samuel taught them to ride to shoot, to read the weather and the seasons. Clara taught him to smile again, to see beauty in sunrises instead of just another day to endure. Rose taught him that young people could be strong, that innocence didn't mean weakness, that hope could survive even the darkest moments. One evening, 6 months after that night of violence, Samuel stood in the cemetery beside Emma's grave. The sisters stood with him, having insisted on coming. The headstone was simple: Emma Kane, beloved daughter, forever free. "I still miss her," Samuel said quietly. "Still wish I could change that day." "But you can't," Clara said gently. "All any of us can do is try to be better today than we were yesterday." "She would have liked you to," Samuel said. "Would have driven me crazy, 3 young women in the house. But it would have been a good crazy." Rose placed flowers on the grave wildflowers she'd picked from the meadow where Emma used to ride. "Thank you," she whispered to the stone. "Thank you for sending your father to save us." As they walked home, Samuel, between the 2 sisters, Clara asked, "Do you regret it?" "Everything that happened." Samuel thought for a long moment. "I regret that it took me 3 years to remember who I was. I regret that fear ruled this town for so long, but regret what happened that night numb. For the first time since Emma died, I did something that mattered." "You saved us," Rose said. "No," Samuel corrected. "We saved each other." The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Smoke rose from the chimney of the ranch house, promising warmth and supper and safety. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was the life they'd fought for, bled for, chosen. And in a frontier where justice came from the barrel of a gun and mercy was often a luxury folks couldn't afford, that was enough. More than enough, it was everything. The winter came early that year, blanketing Redemption Creek in white silence that seemed to muffle even memories. Samuel Kane stood at his frost-covered window, watching Clara teach Rose how to mend harnesses in the barn. 6 months had passed since that bloody night. 6 months of healing that felt both eternal and instant. The house creaked with familiar sounds now, not the ghostly echoes of Emma's absence, but the living warmth of present company. "You're brooding again," Clara said, entering with a steaming cup of coffee. She'd developed this ability to appear soundlessly, like she was made of morning mist. "Just thinking," Samuel replied, accepting the cup gratefully. his fingers stiff with cold and age wrapped around its warmth. "Dangerous habit in a man your age," she teased, but her eyes held concern. They'd grown close, these two damaged souls, though neither quite knew how to name what existed between them. She was young enough to be his daughter, yet carried herself with the gravity of someone who'd lived multiple lifetimes. "Tom Bradley stopped by earlier, so," Clara continued, settling into the chair beside him. "While you were checking the fence line." Samuel's jaw tightened. Tom only made special trips when trouble was brewing. "What did he want?" "There's been word from Fort Collins. Those gunfighters Dalton sent for, they're asking questions about what happened here, about you." The coffee turned bitter in Samuel's mouth. He'd known this peace couldn't last. Violence had a way of echoing, calling to its own kind like wolves howling across valleys. "How many?" Tom wasn't sure. Maybe 3, maybe 4. Professional killers, not like Dalton's rabble. Claire's voice remained steady, but Samuel noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her shawl. "They're saying Dalton hired them with a promise of $5,000. They want their money." "Dalton's dead. Contract died with him." "They don't see it that way." Clara stood pacing to the window. "Tom thinks they're coming for revenge now. Professional pride or some such nonsense. You killed their meal ticket." Rose entered from outside her cheeks, red with cold hay in her hair. She'd grown in these months, no longer the terrified girl from Dalton's back room, but something fiercer forged by survival. "The horses are restless," she announced, then stopped, reading the tension in the room. "What's wrong?" Samuel and Clara exchanged glances. They'd tried to protect Rose from the worst of things, but she always knew. She had developed an animal instinct for danger. "Trouble might be coming," Samuel said simply. There was no point in lying. Rose deserved truth. "Then we'll face it," Rose said, hanging up her coat with deliberate calm. "Like we did before." "This is different," Clara protested. "These aren't drunk cowboys or local bullies. These are men who kill for a living, who've made an art of it." "So was Samuel once," Rose pointed out. "Weren't you a Texas Ranger?" Samuel's past was something they rarely discussed directly. It lived in the house like furniture, present, useful, but unremarked upon. Now it stood before them, demanding acknowledgement. "That was a long time ago," Samuel said. "Skills like that don't fade," Rose insisted. "You proved that 6 months ago." "I was lucky 6 months ago. Had surprise, had help, had righteousness on my side. These men coming, they won't make Dalton's mistakes. They'll be careful, methodical." Samuel stood his knees, protesting. "You two should leave. Take the wagon, head to Denver. I'll give you money." "Stop," Clara interrupted, her voice sharp as winter wind. "Just stop. We've had this conversation before. We're not leaving." "This isn't your fight." "Wasn't yours either originally," Clara shot back. "You made it yours when you walked through that door." "Well, we're making it ours now." The argument might have continued, but the sound of approaching horses ended it. Not the thunderous approach of a war party, but the measured pace of men who knew their business. Samuel moved to the window rifle already in hand. 3 riders approached through the snow, dark shapes against white landscape. They stopped well outside rifle range, and one rider came forward alone, hands visible and empty. Samuel recognized the type immediately, lean, weathered eyes that had seen too much and stopped caring. The man wore his guns low, tied down for quick draw. Everything about him whispered danger. "I'll go talk to him," Samuel said. "Not alone," Clara insisted. "Yes, alone. This is between professionals. There are rules." Samuel stepped onto the porch rifle, cradled but not aimed. The rider stopped 20 feet away, close enough to talk, far enough to react. "Samuel Kane," the man said. It wasn't a question. "Who's asking?" "Name's Cole Matheson. These are my associates, Mr. Birch and Mr. Carver." He gestured to the waiting riders. "We had a business arrangement with Jack Dalton." "Dalton's dead." "So we heard. Unfortunate for everyone involved." Matheson's voice was conversational, like they were discussing weather. "He owed us $5,000 for a job. We'd like to collect." "I didn't inherit his debts." "No, but you inherited his assets in a manner of speaking." Matheson's eyes flicked toward the house. "Those girls he had claim to, they're here, aren't they?" Samuel's grip tightened on the rifle. "They're under my protection." "Admirable." but protection doesn't pay our bills. Matheson shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. Here's my proposition. You pay us what Dalton owed, we ride away. Everyone goes on living. And if I don't have $5,000, then we have a problem. Matheson smiled, but it never touched his eyes. See, Mr. Kane, we're professionals. We can't have word getting out that we came all this way for nothing. Bad for business. So either we get paid or we complete the job Dalton hired us for. Which was, kill you, take the girls. Matheson said it like he was ordering breakfast. Though honestly, that seems like more trouble than it's worth. You have a reputation, Mr. Kane. Texas Ranger, they say. Man who doesn't miss. That was a long time ago. Time's funny that way. Some things it changes, some it doesn't. Matheson touched his hat brim. You have 3 days to get our money. After that, we'll come collecting one way or another. He turned his horse and rode back to his companions. They disappeared into the tree line, but Samuel knew they'd camped close, watching, waiting. Inside, the sisters were armed and ready. They'd heard everything through the thin walls. $5,000, Clara breathed. Where would we even get that kind of money? Samuel walked to the fireplace, reached up to a loose stone and pulled it free. Behind it was a leather pouch heavy with coins. He tossed it on the table. There's about 3,000 there, he said. Everything I saved over the years. Rose counted quickly. 3,200. We're still short. I could sell the horses, Samuel suggested. Maybe get another 500. That's still not enough, Clara said. She was doing the brutal math of survival. And without horses, we couldn't run even if we wanted to. They sat in silence, each lost in thought. The fire-crackled snow began falling again, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. I have an idea, Rose said suddenly. But you won't like it. They looked at her expectantly. The town owes you. All of them. You saved them from Dalton and gave them their freedom back. Some of them got their property back, their businesses. They could contribute. Samuel shook his head. I won't beg. Not beg, Rose insisted. Ask for what's owed. There's a difference. She's right, Clara said slowly. Tom Bradley's store has been thriving since Dalton died. The saloon that's now a meeting hall, someone's running it, making money. These people have prospered because of what you did. What we did, Samuel corrected, and I didn't do it for money. No, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't show gratitude. Clara stood decided. I'll go to town tomorrow. Talk to people. It's too dangerous. Matheson's men will be watching the roads. Then I'll be careful. Clara's chin lifted in that way Samuel had learned meant argument was useless. Besides, they want their money. They won't hurt me if they think I'm trying to get it. That night, none of them slept well. Samuel sat by the window watching for movement in the darkness. Clara cleaned every gun in the house, her hands needing busy work. Rose read Emma's old books by candlelight, seeking escape in stories of places far from here. The next morning, Clara set out for town in the wagon Samuel's pistol hidden beneath her coat. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and bright. She looked back once, seeing Samuel on the porch rifle in hand standing guard. In town, she went first to Tom Bradley's store. Tom was arranging goods on shelves, the simple pleasure of commerce without fear still novel to him. Clara, he greeted warmly, then saw her expression. What's wrong? She explained about Matheson and his men, about the money needed. Tom's face grew grave. 5,000's a fortune, he said. Most folks here don't have that kind of money. Not individually, no. But together? Tom considered. It's possible. But people are scared, Clara. They just got free of one threat. Asking them to involve themselves in another. They're already involved. If these men kill Samuel, take Rose and me. How long before another Dalton rises? Fear's like a weed, Tom. You have to pull it out by the roots, or it just grows back. Tom nodded slowly. I'll call a town meeting. Tonight. You can make your case. Clara spent the day going door to door, speaking to people individually. Some slammed doors in her face. Others listened, but made no promises. A few, remembering their own daughters, their own fears under Dalton's rule, quietly promised support. The meeting that night was held in the old saloon. About 30 people showed up, not the whole town, but more than Clara had hoped. She stood before them feeling young and small, but drawing strength from necessity. "I'm not here to beg," she began. "I'm here to remind you of a debt. Not money owed, but something deeper. 6 months ago, Samuel Kane stood alone against Dalton. He didn't know you'd come to help. He didn't expect it. He stood anyway because it was right. We came, though," someone called out. "We fought too." "Yes," Clara agreed. "You did, and that's why I have hope you'll help now. These men threatening us, they're not after you. They could ride through this town, take what they want, and you could turn your backs, pretend not to see, just like before." The room was silent, uncomfortable. "But I don't think you will," Clara continued, "because you've remembered what it feels like to stand up. You've remembered that together you're strong. Samuel gave you that reminder. Now he needs your help." "How much?" asked Mrs. Henderson, who ran the boarding house. $5,000. "I know it's a lot." "It's impossible," interrupted Jacob Miller, the bank manager, who'd somehow kept his position despite his cooperation with Dalton. "The town doesn't have that kind of money." "The town might not," said a voice from the back, but Jack Dalton did. Everyone turned. William Garrett, Dalton's former lawyer, stepped forward. He was a thin, nervous man who'd handled Dalton's papers out of fear more than loyalty. "Dalton kept cash hidden," Garrett continued. "Lots of it. He didn't trust banks, thought they were too easy to rob." "Where?" Tom Bradley asked. "I don't know exactly. But I know who might his woman Maria. She lived above the saloon, kept his books sometimes." Maria Espinoza had disappeared after Dalton's death, but several people thought she might be hiding at her sister's place 10 miles south. "Even if we find it," Miller protested, "that's blood money, stolen from people Dalton squeezed." "Then use it to prevent more blood," Clara said simply. "Use it to buy peace." The argument went on for hours. Some saw it as justice, others as theft. But finally a consensus emerged they would look for Dalton's hidden money. If found, it would go to paying off Matheson. Any remainder would be distributed among Dalton's victims. The next morning, a small group set out for Maria's sister's farm. Clara wanted to go, but Tom insisted she return to Samuel's ranch. "He's probably going crazy with worry," Tom said. He was right. When Clara arrived home, Samuel was pacing like a caged animal. His relief at seeing her safe quickly turned to anger. "You could have been killed, or taken, or—" "But I wasn't," Clara interrupted, "and I might have found a solution." She explained about Dalton's hidden money, about the town's tentative support. Samuel listened, skeptical but hopeful. "It's a long shot," he said. "Better than no shot at all." That afternoon, as they waited for news from town, Rose practiced shooting behind the barn. Her aim had improved dramatically over the months. Samuel watched her, seeing not the frightened girl from Dalton's back room, but a young woman finding her strength. "You're pulling right," he advised, anticipating the recoil. Rose adjusted, fired again. The can she was aiming at flew off the fence post. "Better," Samuel said. "You might make a marksman yet. Like you. Better than me, hopefully. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be." Rose lowered the gun, studying him. "You're scared." It wasn't a question. Samuel considered lying, but respected her too much for that. "Terrified, so," he admitted. "Not of dying, of failing again, of not being fast enough, good enough." "You won't fail," Rose said with the certainty of youth. "You didn't fail us before. I had luck before. And help. You'll have help again. Clara and me, we won't let you face this alone." Samuel wanted to argue to forbid it, but he saw Emma's determination in Rose's eyes. Not Emma herself, Rose was her own person, but that same fierce refusal to be protected at the cost of others. "If it comes to a fight," he said finally, "you follow my lead. No heroics." "Same goes for you," Rose replied, and Samuel found himself almost smiling. That evening, Tom Bradley arrived with news. They'd found Maria, convinced her to talk. Dalton had indeed hidden money, nearly $10,000 in gold and bills buried beneath the old saloon. The town was digging it up now. 10,000, Clara breathed. "That's enough to pay them and have plenty left over." "If they take it and leave," Samuel said darkly. "Men like Matheson don't always keep their word." "Then what do we do?" Samuel was quiet for a moment, thinking. We give them what they want, but we prepare for betrayal. Tom, I need you to gather the men who fought with us before. Have them ready but hidden. If Matheson takes the money and goes, fine. If not, Tom nodded. I'll spread the word. When? Tomorrow noon. Tell Matheson to meet us in town in front of everyone. He's less likely to try something with witnesses. That night was the longest yet. Samuel cleaned and loaded every weapon, checked and rechecked ammunition. Clara cooked, needing the normalcy of routine. Rose sat by the fire, writing in a journal she'd started keeping their story. She said so someone would remember if the worst happened. As dawn broke, they prepared to leave for town. Samuel helped the sisters into the wagon, then paused, looking back at the ranch. Whatever happens, he said, I want you both to know these months with you here, they've been good. The best since Emma. Clara reached out, took his weathered hand in hers. They're not ending. We're going to pay those men they're going to leave, and we're going to come home and have supper like always. From your lips to God's ears, Samuel murmured, but his eyes remained troubled. The ride to town felt both endless and too quick. People lined the streets, word having spread. Some carried hidden weapons ready to support Samuel if needed. Others simply watched, bearing witness. Matheson and his men were already there, positioned strategically. One by the bank, one near the stable, Matheson himself in the center of the street. They'd chosen their spots, carefully controlling angles, escape routes. Samuel stopped the wagon 20 feet from Matheson. Tom Bradley approached with a heavy saddlebag. $5,000, Tom announced loudly so everyone could hear. As requested. Matheson dismounted, walked forward slowly. He opened the bag, examined the contents. Gold coins caught the sunlight, bills rustled in the wind. Seems about right, he said. Then his eyes found Samuel. You know, Kane, I studied you. Your record with the Rangers. 43 kills, they say. All justified, all legal. You were something special. That was another life. Was it man doesn't change that much? Skills like yours, they're like riding a horse. Body remembers even when the mind wants to forget. Matheson closed the saddlebag, handed it to Birch, who'd moved closer. For a moment, nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to cut. We done here? Samuel asked. Matheson smiled that cold smile again. Almost. See, there's the matter of professional pride. You killed our employer. That's bad for our reputation. Samuel's hand inched toward his gun. You got your money. True. But money doesn't fix everything. Matheson's hand was near his own weapon now. Tell you what, Kane. You and me. Right here, right now. Fair draw. You win, we leave. I win, we take the girls anyway. No, Clara said sharply, starting to climb down from the wagon. Stay put, Samuel ordered, never taking his eyes off Matheson. This isn't about you anymore. Like hell it isn't. Clara. Samuel's voice was soft but firm. Please, just this once, let me handle it. The street had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Samuel stepped down from the wagon, moved to the center of the street. His duster coat pushed back, revealing his holstered Colt. Your terms are acceptable, Samuel said formally. Matheson nodded, pleased. Birch Carver, anyone interferes, kill them all. The two gunmen positioned themselves, hands on weapons. The townspeople shrank back but didn't flee. They'd come to witness for better or worse. Samuel and Matheson faced each other 10 paces apart. The sun was high, casting short shadows. No advantage to either man. On 3, Matheson suggested. Your count. Samuel agreed. From the wagon, Clara gripped Rose's hand so tight it hurt. Rose was praying under her breath, words tumbling over each other. 1, Matheson called. Samuel's mind went quiet, the noise of the world fading. He was back in Texas, facing down rustlers and killers, young again, fast again, righteous again. 2. But he wasn't young. His joints ached, his eyes weren't as sharp, his hands not as steady. Matheson was in his prime, practiced, confident. 3. Bust 'em. Both men drew. The guns fired so close together it sounded like one shot. For a heartbeat, both stood frozen. Then Matheson looked down at the spreading red stain on his chest, surprise replacing confidence. Well, he said conversationally. 44. He fell forward into the dust and didn't move. Samuel's gun was still raised, smoke drifting from the barrel. A line of red appeared on his neck where Matheson's bullet had grazed him an inch to the right, and he'd be dead. Birch and Carver hadn't moved, calculating odds. The townspeople were armed now, weapons appearing from beneath coats and aprons. The mathematics of survival had shifted. "Take your boss and go," Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly. "You got paid. Job's done." Birch looked at Carver, some silent communication passing between them. Then they holstered their weapons, loaded Matheson's body onto his horse, and rode out without a word. As soon as they were gone, Samuel's knees buckled. Clara was there, catching him, holding him up. Rose brought water, and Tom Bradley pressed a cloth to the wound on his neck. "You did it," Clara whispered. "You saved us again." "We saved us," Samuel corrected, looking at the armed townspeople. "All of us." They helped him back to the wagon. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson approached with a basket. "For the ride home," she said simply. "And thank you." Others came forward, small gifts, quiet words of gratitude. The town that had cowered under Dalton, that had found courage once and nearly lost it again, had held firm. On the ride home, Rose asked, "Do you think they'll come back, Birch and Carver?" "No," Samuel said with certainty. Matheson was the leader, the one with pride to defend. The others were just hired guns. They got paid, they'll move on. "And us?" Clara asked. "What do we do now?" Samuel looked at his ranch, appearing in the distance, smoke rising peacefully from the chimney. "We live. We work the land. We raise horses. We have supper together. We remember those we lost and cherish what we have. That's simple, and that complicated." As they pulled up to the house, Samuel saw something that stopped his heart. Flowers, wild flowers that Rose must have planted, were beginning to bloom along the porch. The same kind Emma used to pick, the same kind they'd placed on her grave. "They came up while we were gone," Rose said, noticing his stare. "I planted them months ago, wasn't sure they'd take." Samuel climbed down from the wagon, walked to the flowers, knelt beside them. They were small, fragile, but determinedly pushing through the cold soil toward the sun. "They're beautiful," he said, his voice thick. Clara and Rose joined him, one on each side. They stood there, this unlikely family, looking at new life growing where there had been only grief. "Emma would have loved them," Clara said softly. "She would have," Samuel agreed. Then, standing with difficulty, his body remembering every one of his 62 years, he added, "Come on, let's go inside. I don't know about you two, but I could use some of Mrs. Henderson's pie." As they entered the house, Samuel paused at the threshold, looking back. The sun was setting, painting the mountains purple and gold, just like that day 6 months ago, when everything changed. But now, instead of facing that sunset alone with his ghosts, he had Clara and Rose beside him, and the promise of tomorrow. The house welcomed them with warmth and the smell of home. Rose immediately started preparing supper, humming a tune her mother used to sing. Clara helped Samuel with his wound, her hands gentle but efficient. "You know," she said as she worked, "Matheson was right about one thing." "What's that?" "You really were something special, still are." Samuel caught her hand, held it. "We all are. That's what I learned. Every person who stood up today, who refused to bow to fear, they're all something special." That night after supper, they sat on the porch, despite the cold, wrapped in blankets, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The crisis had passed. The threat ended, but none of them were quite ready to return to normal routine. "Will there be others?" Rose asked. "Other men like Dalton or Matheson?" "Probably," Samuel admitted. "The world's full of men who take what they want, who see kindness as weakness." "Then we'll face them," Clara said firmly. "Together." "Together," Rose echoed. Samuel looked at these two women who'd become his family, his redemption, his reason to keep going. He thought of Emma always, but now the memory brought warmth along with the pain. She would have loved Clara's strength, Rose's spirit. She would have been proud of what they'd built here. "You know what tomorrow is?" Rose asked suddenly. Neither Samuel nor Clara knew. "It's my birthday. I'll be 18. They sat in surprised silence. In all the chaos, none of them had thought about such ordinary things as birthdays. Then we'll celebrate, Clara declared. A proper party, cake, and everything. I don't need to, Rose started. Everyone needs their birthday celebrated, Samuel interrupted. Emma taught me that. She used to say birthdays were proof that you'd survived another year, and that was always worth celebrating. Rose smiled a real smile that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful. Then we'll celebrate. They sat there until the cold drove them inside, planning a party, discussing the spring planting, debating whether to buy more horses or cattle. Ordinary conversations about an ordinary future, the most precious gift any of them could imagine. That night, Samuel didn't stand watch. There was no need. The threats were gone, the doors were barred, and his girls, he'd started thinking of them as his girls were safe. He slept deeply for the first time in 3 years, and if he dreamed, they were dreams of flowers blooming and laughter echoing through rooms too long silent. The morning of Rose's birthday dawned with unexpected warmth, as if spring had decided to arrive early just for her. Samuel woke to the sound of Clara already busy in the kitchen, the smell of fresh bread filling the house. He lay still for a moment, listening to the sounds of life. Clara's humming Rose's laughter from somewhere outside the everyday miracle of not being alone. He dressed slowly, his body protesting yesterday's confrontation with Matheson. The graze on his neck had scabbed over, but it served as a reminder that violence, even when necessary, always extracted a price. As he descended the stairs, he found Clara flour-dusted and determined, surrounded by mixing bowls and ingredients. "You're making a cake," he observed unnecessarily. "Rose deserves something special," Clara said, not looking up from her work. "She's been through enough to age her 10 years, but she's still just turning 18. Samuel watched her work, the efficient grace of her movements, the way morning light caught in her hair. There was something he'd been meaning to say for weeks now, but the words always seemed to stick in his throat like thorns. "Clara," he began, then stopped as Rose burst through the door, cheeks flushed with excitement. "There's a rider coming," she announced. "Not from town, from the east." Samuel's hand went instinctively to his gun, but Rose quickly added, "Just one. And he's leading a pack horse. Looks like a traveler, not trouble." They went to the porch together, watching the lone figure approach. As he got closer, Samuel recognized the type, a traveling preacher, his black coat dusty from the road Bible visible in his saddlebag. The man was young, maybe 30, with earnest eyes and the slightly overwhelmed look of someone new to the frontier. "Good morning," the preacher called out, stopping at a respectful distance. "I'm Reverend James Harper. I'm looking for the Kane Ranch." "You found it?" Samuel said carefully. "What's your business?" "I've come from Fort Collins. The church there heard about what happened here, about the stand against corruption, about courage in the face of evil." The Reverend dismounted, his movements awkward, clearly more comfortable with books than horses. "They sent me to establish a church in Redemption Creek, if the town will have me." Claire and Rose exchanged glances. The town hadn't had a preacher since the last one fled from Dalton's threats 2 years ago. "The town makes its own decisions," Samuel said. "But you're welcome to water your horses, maybe have some breakfast." "That's very kind." The Reverend's relief was obvious. He'd probably expected suspicion or outright hostility. As he tended to his horses, he added, "Actually, Mr. Kane, you're part of the reason I'm here." "How's that?" "Your story has spread. A man who stood against evil, who protected the innocent, who inspired others to find their courage. Some are calling you a hero." Samuel's expression hardened. "Then some are fools. I'm just a man who did what needed doing." "Perhaps," the Reverend said gently, "but sometimes that's exactly what heroism is." They invited him in for breakfast, where he proved to be pleasant company, full of news from the wider world. He spoke of changes coming to the frontier railroads, pushing West civilization following in their wake. Towns like Redemption Creek wouldn't stay isolated much longer. "Change can be good," he said, accepting another biscuit from Clara. "But it can also bring new challenges." "We've had enough challenges," Rose said firmly. "We'd like some peace for a while." "Peace?" the Reverend mused. "A worthy goal. Though in my experience, peace isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice." Samuel found himself warming to the young man despite his initial wariness. There was sincerity in him, untested perhaps, but genuine. "You planning to stay for Rose's birthday party?" Clara asked. "It's today." I wouldn't want to intrude. Nonsense, Rose interrupted. The more the merrier. Besides, when's the last time we had a real preacher say grace at our table? As the day progressed, more people arrived from town. Tom Bradley came with his family. Mrs. Henderson brought 2 pies, and even the school teacher, Miss Patterson, appeared with a small wrapped gift. The house that had stood empty for 3 years was suddenly full of voices and laughter. Samuel found himself on the porch with Tom watching the youngsters play some game Rose had organized in the yard. Clara was inside with the women putting finishing touches on the cake. Never thought I'd see this place alive again, Tom said quietly. Neither did I. You know Clara's in love with you. Samuel nearly choked on his coffee. Tom, I'm not blind Sam. Neither's anyone else. The way she looks at you, the way you look at her. She's young enough to be my daughter. So this is the frontier, not Boston society. People make their own rules here. Tom studied his friend. Emma wouldn't want you to be alone. Don't, Samuel warned, his voice low and dangerous. Someone needs to say it. You saved those girls, gave them a home, a family, but you're still punishing yourself for something that wasn't your fault. Before Samuel could respond, a commotion arose from the road. Another group was approaching, but these weren't townspeople. 3 wagons heavily loaded with armed outriders. Samuel recognized the lead rider, Marcus Wellington, owner of the largest ranch in the valley, a man who'd stayed carefully neutral during the Dalton years. Wellington dismounted, his expensive boots shining even through the trail dust. He was everything Samuel wasn't, younger, wealthier, with the kind of confidence that came from never having lost everything. Kane, he said, touching his hat brim. Ladies. His eyes lingered on Clara, who had emerged from the house. I heard there was a celebration. It's my birthday, Rose said, stepping forward with her new confidence. You're welcome to join us, Mr. Wellington. That's kind, but I'm here on business. Wellington's attention returned to Samuel. I have a proposition. Samuel waited, saying nothing. The railroad's coming through next year. They'll need beef, lots of it. I'm expanding my operation, buying up land. I'd like to buy your ranch. The porch went silent. Everyone understood what this meant. Wellington was making his move, trying to become the new power in the valley. Not for sale, Samuel said flatly. I'll pay well. More than fair market value. Not for sale. Wellington's friendly mask slipped slightly. You should consider it, Kane. You're not getting younger, and those girls... His eyes went to Clara again, making Samuel's hands clench. They deserve better than a run-down ranch and an old man's protection. What they deserve, Clara said, stepping beside Samuel, is none of your business. Wellington smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Everything in this valley is my business, Miss Morrison. Or it will be. Like it was Dalton's, Rose asked innocently, but her eyes were sharp. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Wellington was smarter than Dalton Sutler, but potentially more dangerous. You should leave, Samuel said quietly. I'll make one more offer, Wellington said. $10,000 cash. You could go anywhere, start over. We already started over, Samuel replied. Right here. Wellington mounted his horse. The offer stands, but not forever. The frontier's changing, Kane. Men like you, like what you represent, it's all going to be history soon. After he left, the party tried to resume, but the shadow of his visit lingered. The Reverend said grace, they sang happy birthday to Rose, and she opened her gifts, a new dress from the town ladies, a leather-bound journal from Miss Patterson, a silver locket from Clara that had belonged to their mother. When Rose opened Samuel's gift, a beautifully tooled holster and gun belt, she threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. It was Emma's, Samuel said softly. I had it sized down for you. If you're going to carry a gun, might as well do it properly. As evening approached and guests began leaving, Reverend Harper asked to speak with Samuel privately. They walked to the barn where the Reverend's manner became serious. Wellington isn't the only one interested in this valley, he said. On my way here, I heard talk. There's a group of investors from back east. They're buying up land all along the proposed railroad route. Let them. My land's not for sale. They don't always ask. The Reverend looked uncomfortable. I shouldn't be telling you this. It's not very Christian of me, but they have ways of making people sell. Legal ways, mostly. Calling in debts, raising taxes through political connections, sometimes arranging accidents. Samuel studied the young preacher with new respect. You're warning me. I'm saying be careful. What you did here, standing up to Dalton, it inspired people. But it also put a target on your back. There are those who don't want strong, independent men controlling key pieces of land. That night, after everyone had gone, the three of them sat around the kitchen table. The cake was mostly gone, dishes washed, the house settling into quiet. We need to talk about Wellington, Clara said. Nothing to talk about. We're not selling. He won't give up, Rose pointed out. Men like him never do. Samuel knew they were right. He'd traded one threat for another violence for economics, but the game remained the same, those with power trying to take from those without. Then we get stronger, he said. We improve the ranch, make it profitable. We build alliances with the other small ranchers. We make ourselves too valuable to the community to push out. How? Clara asked. Samuel smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. We raise the best horses in the valley. We help our neighbors. We make this place what Emma always dreamed it could be, not just a ranch, but a home, a beacon. Over the following weeks, they threw themselves into the work. Samuel taught the girls everything he knew about horses breeding, training, recognizing quality. Clara proved to have a natural gift for it, her gentle manner calming even the most skittish animals. Rose became their record keeper, her neat handwriting filling ledgers with breeding lines and sale records. The Reverend became a regular visitor, often staying for dinner. His presence brought something they hadn't realized was missing, a connection to the wider world, to ideas beyond survival. He and Rose would debate theology and philosophy, while Clara and Samuel worked with the horses, their voices drifting across the evening air. One afternoon, as Samuel was breaking a particularly stubborn Mustang, Clara watched from the fence rail. The horse bucked and twisted, but Samuel held on with a grace that belied his years. You're showing off, she called out. Maybe a little, he admitted, dismounting after the horse finally accepted his presence. Clara jumped down from the fence, approaching slowly. Samuel, we need to talk. He knew what was coming, had been dreading it for weeks. Clara. No, let me speak. She stood before him, small but fierce. I know what you're going to say. I'm too young. You're too old. It's inappropriate. You're supposed to be a father figure. I've heard all the arguments you've been having with yourself. Then you know why. I know why you think it's impossible. But Samuel, I'm not a child. I haven't been since the day my father died and left us to Dalton's mercy. I've made my choice. You could have any young man in town. Build a normal life. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. Normal. After everything we've been through. There is no normal for us, Samuel. There's just what we choose to build from the pieces we have left. Before he could respond, Rose's voice rang out from the house. Riders coming, lots of them. They ran to the porch, Samuel grabbing his rifle, but as the group approached, he saw they weren't Wellington's men or Eastern investors. They were small ranchers, his neighbors, people who'd scraped by during the Dalton years and were still struggling now. Ben Murphy, who owned the spread to the south, dismounted first. Sam, we need to talk. They gathered in the main room 8 ranchers who together controlled maybe a quarter of the valley's land. Ben laid out the situation. Wellington's been making offers to all of us, low offers but with threats attached. He's got connections in the territorial government. There's talk of reassessing property values, raising taxes. He could price us all out within a year. What do you want me to do about it? Samuel asked. Lead us, Ben said simply. Like you did against Dalton. You've got the reputation, the skills. Together we might stand a chance. Samuel looked around the room at these men, not fighters, just farmers and ranchers trying to survive. This isn't the same as facing down gunmen. This is lawyers and politicians and money. Then we learn to fight that way, Clara said, surprising everyone. The Reverend knows people in Fort Collins, has connections to newspapers back east. We publicize what Wellington's doing, make it politically costly for his government friends to help him. And we pool our resources, Rose added. Instead of competing with each other, we cooperate. Share breeding stock, coordinate cattle drives, negotiate as a group with the railroad. The ranchers looked at these young women with surprise and growing respect. Samuel felt pride swell in his chest. They'd learned more than just shooting and riding, they'd learned strategy. It could work, Ben said slowly, but Wellington won't take it lying down. Then we're ready for whatever he tries, Samuel said. All of us together. They formed an alliance that night, nothing formal, just a handshake agreement among neighbors. But it was a foundation for something larger. After the others left, the Reverend stayed behind. You know, he said, I could perform weddings, if the need arose. Samuel glared at him, but Clara laughed. Are you proposing for him, Reverend? Merely offering my services, Harper said innocently. Should they be required? That night, unable to sleep, Samuel walked out to Emma's grave. The wildflowers Rose had planted were spreading, creating a carpet of color around the headstone. He knelt, placing his hand on the cool stone. I don't know what to do, little one, he whispered. Clara, she's not you could never replace you, but she makes me want to live again, not just survive. Is that betrayal, or is that what you'd want? The wind rustled through the flowers, sounding almost like laughter, young laughter, free and encouraging. When he returned to the house, he found Clara on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the cool night air. Couldn't sleep either, she asked. Too much on my mind. They stood together watching stars wheel overhead. Finally, Clara spoke. I'm not asking you to love me the way you loved your wife or Emma. I'm asking you to let yourself love again, period. However that looks, whatever that means. Samuel turned to her, seeing not the frightened girl from Dalton's back room, but a woman forged by hardship into something unbreakable. You deserve better than a broken old man. You're not broken, Clara said firmly. You're healing. We all are. And we're doing it together. She rose on her tiptoes and kissed him soft and brief, then went inside before he could respond. Samuel stood alone on the porch, touching his lips, feeling something he'd thought dead forever stirring in his chest. Hope for tomorrow, not just resignation to it. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A carriage from Fort Collins, elegant and out of place on the rough ranch road. From it emerged a man in an expensive suit and a woman in traveling clothes that probably cost more than the ranch made in a year. Mr. Kane, the man said, approaching with an extended hand. I'm Theodore Blackwood, attorney at law. This is Mrs. Catherine Dalton. Samuel's hand went to his gun. Dalton's widow. Yes? The woman said, her voice cultured Eastern. Though widow is all I share with that brute, thank God. She was nothing like Samuel had expected, refined, educated, probably 15 years younger than Dalton had been. She looked at the ranch with interest rather than disdain. What do you want? Samuel asked bluntly. To make amends if possible, Catherine said, and to warn you. May we come in? Against his better judgment, Samuel allowed them inside. Clara and Rose joined them, suspicious but curious. I married Jack Dalton 5 years ago in Chicago, Catherine began. I thought he was a successful businessman. By the time I learned the truth, it was too late. He kept me virtual prisoner in Fort Collins, away from his activities here. Why didn't you leave? Clara asked. He said he'd hunt me down, kill me. Catherine's composure cracked slightly. I believed him. I'd seen what he was capable of. But he's dead now, Rose pointed out. Yes, thanks to you. Catherine looked at Samuel with something like gratitude. You freed me as much as you freed this town. That doesn't explain why you're here, Samuel said. Blackwood spoke up. Mrs. Dalton has information about Wellington and the Eastern investors, things her late husband was involved in before his death. Catherine nodded. Jack was many things, but he wasn't stupid. He kept records, documents. He knew Wellington was planning to take over the valley, had been in communication with a group called the Western Development Corporation. They're buying up land all along the future railroad route using whatever means necessary. We know about them, Samuel said. Do you know they've bought judges, that they have contracts with the railroad giving them exclusive supply rights, that anyone who doesn't sell to them will be frozen out, unable to move their cattle or crops to market? The room went quiet as the implications sank in. This was bigger than just Wellington, bigger than just their valley. I have the documents to prove it, Catherine continued. Letters, contracts, even records of bribes. Jack kept them as insurance planning to blackmail Wellington if necessary. Why give them to us? Clara asked suspiciously. Because I want to see Wellington fall. He was Jack's partner in everything vile. And because she looked at Samuel, I owe you a debt. You ended my nightmare. Let me help end yours. Samuel exchanged glances with Clara and Rose. This could change everything, or it could be a trap. Leave the documents, he said finally. We'll review them, decide what to do. There's one more thing, Blackwood said. Mrs. Dalton wants to donate Dalton's remaining assets to the town. The saloon building, several properties, and about $30,000 in cash and securities. $30,000, Rose gasped. Jack was very successful at being evil, Catherine said bitterly. I want his blood money to do some good. Build a school, a real church, make this town what it should have been. After they left, leaving a box of documents behind, the three sat stunned. The morning had shifted everything they thought they knew. It could all be lies, Samuel said, though he didn't believe it. Catherine Dalton's pain had been too real, too familiar. Or it could be our salvation, Clara countered, already examining the documents. Look at this, Wellington's been lying about the railroad contracts. He doesn't have exclusive rights. That's just what he's been telling people. They spent the rest of the day going through papers, piecing together a picture of corruption that reached from their valley to the territorial capital. Wellington wasn't just trying to buy land, he was trying to create a monopoly that would make him one of the richest men in the West. We need to get this to the newspapers, Rose said. The Reverend has connections. This could destroy Wellington. Or he could destroy us first, Samuel warned. Men with this much to lose don't go down easily. As if in response to his words, they heard horses approaching. Wellington himself with a dozen armed men. Samuel met them on the porch, rifle ready. Kane, Wellington said, not dismounting. I heard you had visitors from Fort Collins. News travels fast. Catherine Dalton's a bitter woman with delusions. Whatever she told you, it's lies. Documented lies, Samuel asked mildly. Wellington's expression darkened. You're making a mistake, Kane. I offered to buy you out fairly. That offer's withdrawn. Now you can sell at my price or lose everything. Or option 3, Clara said, stepping out with papers in her hand. We expose you for the corrupt snake you are. Wellington's men shifted restlessly, hands moving toward weapons. But Samuel had already levered a round into his rifle, the sound sharp in the afternoon air. You're outnumbered, Wellington pointed out. Story of my life, Samuel replied. Hasn't stopped me yet. You got lucky with Dalton and Matheson. That luck's run out. Has it? The Reverend's voice came from the barn where he emerged with Tom Bradley and 6 other armed townsmen. Seems to me Mr. Kane's luck is holding fine. Wellington looked around calculating. He was a businessman, not a gunfighter. The economics of violence didn't favor him here. This isn't over, he said finally. No, Samuel agreed. But your way of doing things is. The frontier's changing Wellington. You're right about that. But it's not changing into what you think. It's becoming something better despite men like you. Wellington wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. But everyone knew this was just the beginning of a different kind of war. That evening, as they planned their next moves, the Reverend performed an impromptu service in the main room. Not a wedding Samuel wasn't ready for, that might never be, but a blessing on the house and all who dwelt there. This home has seen sorrow, Harper said, his young voice carrying surprising authority. But from sorrow has come strength, from loss, love, from isolation, community. May it continue to be a beacon of hope in dark times. Amen, Rose said firmly, and the others echoed her. Later, as the Reverend and townsmen prepared to leave, Tom pulled Samuel aside. You know Wellington won't stop. He'll use the law, use money, use whatever he has to. I know. You ready for that kind of fight? Samuel looked back at the house where Clara and Rose were laughing about something, their voices bright in the darkness. I wasn't, but I am now. Because of them. Because of all of it. Emma's death nearly killed me, Tom. But those girls, this fight, it's given me purpose again. Not just revenge or justice, but something to build, something to protect. Tom clapped him on the shoulder. Then we're with you, all of us. After everyone left, Samuel found himself alone with Clara in the kitchen. Rose had gone to bed exhausted from the day's revelations. "You kissed me last night," he said without preamble. "I did." "Why?" Clara looked at him with those steady eyes that had seen too much. "Because I wanted to. Because life's too short and too uncertain to wait for perfect moments. Because you're a good man who deserves love even if you don't believe it." "I'm old enough to be your father." "But you're not my father. You're the man who saved us, who gave us a home, who stands against evil even when he's outnumbered." She moved closer. "You're the man I choose." Samuel wanted to protest, to list all the reasons it was wrong, but looking at her fierce and beautiful and absolutely certain, he found his objections dying in his throat. "I can't promise you anything," he said finally. "This fight with Wellington could destroy us all. I'm not asking for promises. I'm asking for whatever time we have." He kissed her then properly this time, feeling like a drowning man who'd found air. It wasn't the same as what he'd had with his wife or the love he'd felt for Emma. It was something new, unexpected, blooming in the ashes of old grief like Rose's wildflowers. When they parted, Clara smiled. See, the world didn't end. "No," Samuel agreed wonderingly. "It didn't." They stood there in the kitchen of the house that had known such sorrow, holding each other, while outside the wind sang through the valley and the stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow blessing them all the same. The kiss lingered between them in the days that followed, unspoken but present in every glance, every accidental touch. Samuel threw himself into preparing for Wellington's next move, but his awareness of Clara had shifted, deepened into something he couldn't quite name. Rose, perceptive as always, said nothing but smiled knowingly whenever she caught them looking at each other. 3 days after Wellington's threat, a man arrived from the territorial capital. Judge Harrison Pike, a name that made Tom Bradley curse when he heard it. Pike was Wellington's creature through and through, bought and paid for years ago. He came with legal documents, a small army of clerks, and a smile that never reached his eyes. "Mr. Kane," Pike said, standing on the porch like he owned it, "I'm here to inform you that your property taxes have been reassessed. You owe the territory $8,000 payable within 30 days. $8,000, Clara gasped. "That's more than the ranch makes in 2 years. The land has become more valuable with the railroad coming," Pike said smoothly. "The assessment reflects current market value." Samuel studied the documents, his face carved from stone. "And I suppose if I can't pay, the property goes to auction." "That's the law." Pike's smile widened. "Though I understand Mr. Wellington might be willing to help if you were to reconsider his offer." "Get off my land," Samuel said quietly. 30 days, Mr. Kane. Then I'll be back with the sheriff to enforce the law." After Pike left, they sat around the table, the weight of the situation crushing. $8,000 might as well have been $8 million. "We could use Catherine Dalton's money," Rose suggested. "She offered it to the town, but surely—" "No." Samuel cut her off. "That money's for the community, not our personal troubles." "Then what?" Clara demanded. "We can't just give up." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then stood. "We don't give up. We fight back. But not with guns this time. Wellington wants to use the law, fine. We'll use it too." He sent Rose to town to fetch Reverend Harper and Tom Bradley. When they arrived, Samuel laid out his plan. It was audacious, possibly illegal, and their only chance. "The documents Catherine gave us prove Wellington bribed Pike," Samuel said. "But Pike's a territorial judge. Local law can't touch him. However, federal law can. The nearest federal marshal is in Denver," Tom pointed out. "By the time we get word to him, the 30 days will be up." "Then we don't wait for him to come to us," Samuel said. "I'll go to Denver, present the evidence directly. Harper, you'll contact your newspaper friends, make this public. The territory won't dare foreclose if there's federal investigation pending." "And if Wellington tries something while you're gone?" Clara asked, fear creeping into her voice. "That's why Tom's going to organize a rotating watch. The Ranchers' Alliance will protect the place." "I'm coming with you," Clara announced. "No." "Samuel Kane, you do not get to make decisions for me." Her eyes flashed dangerously. "Besides, a man traveling alone is vulnerable. A man traveling with a woman is just a couple heading to the city." The word she'd almost said hung in the air. Wife. Samuel felt his chest tighten at the thought. She's right, Harper said unexpectedly. It would be safer. And I'll stay here with Rose, Tom added. Keep things running. Samuel wanted to argue, but he saw the determination in Clara's face. She'd made her choice just as she'd chosen him that night in the kitchen. We leave tomorrow, he said finally. That night, as they prepared for the journey, Rose cornered Samuel in the barn where he was checking the horses. You love her, she said. It wasn't a question. Samuel's hand stilled on the saddle he was adjusting. Rose, it's okay. I'm glad. You both deserve happiness. She moved closer, her young face serious. But if you hurt her, if you push her away because of some misguided nobility, I'll never forgive you. She's your sister. You should be protecting her from men like me. Rose laughed, the sound surprisingly bitter. Men like you. You mean men who risk everything to save strangers. Men who stand against evil when everyone else cowers. If there were more men like you, Samuel Kane, the world would be a far better place. She left him standing there wondering when the scared girl from Dalton's back room had become this fierce young woman. The journey to Denver took 3 days. Samuel and Clara rode side by side through valleys turning green with spring, past streams swollen with snowmelt under skies that seemed endless. At night they camped under stars, maintaining careful distance, the propriety of it. A joke, considering all they'd been through, but somehow still important. On the second night, as they sat by their small fire, Clara asked, "Tell me about your wife, Emma's mother." Samuel was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, staring into the flames, he spoke. Margaret was everything I wasn't. Cultured, educated, from a good family in Virginia. What she saw in a rough Texas Ranger I'll never know. But she loved me, God help her. Followed me out here to the frontier away from everything she knew. She must have been strong. She was. But the frontier broke her anyway, not all at once, but slowly. The isolation, the hardship, the constant fear. When Emma was born, I thought it would help give her purpose, and it did for a while. But then the fever came. Clara reached out, took his weathered hand in hers. She died when Emma was 12. Delirious at the end, didn't even know me. Her last clear words were asking me to take care of Emma to keep her safe. His voice broke. I failed them both. No, Clara said firmly. You loved them both. You did your best. Sometimes that's all any of us can do. They reached Denver on the third day, the city sprawling before them like something from another world. Buildings of brick and stone streets filled with carriages, people dressed in fashions Clara had only seen in magazines. It was overwhelming after the quiet of the ranch. They found lodging at a respectable hotel, Samuel registering them as Mr. Kane and daughter the lie sitting uncomfortably on his tongue. The federal marshal's office was their first stop, but they found it nearly empty. Most of the marshals were out on assignment. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked at their evidence with growing alarm. This is serious. Judge Pike is a respected member of the territorial government. He's a bought man, Samuel said bluntly, and we can prove it. Marshal Coleman will want to see this. He's due back tomorrow. Can you wait? They had no choice. That evening, in the hotel dining room, Clara wore a dress they'd bought from a shop, simple but elegant, transforming her from ranch woman to lady. Samuel couldn't stop staring. You clean up well yourself, she said, noting his new shirt and freshly shaved face. Feel like I'm playing dress-up. Sometimes playing a part is necessary. She paused, then added quietly, though I prefer the real you, dust stubble and all. After dinner, they walked the streets of Denver, marveling at gas lamps, shop windows, the press of humanity. It was exciting, but also suffocating. Samuel found himself longing for open sky, for silence, broken only by wind and birdsong. Could you live here? Clara asked. In a city like this? No. You. Maybe once. Before everything. Now I can't imagine living anywhere but the ranch. They'd stopped walking, standing under a street lamp, the city flowing around them like a river around stones. Samuel looked down at her, this woman who'd chosen his difficult life, his dangerous stand, his broken heart. Clara, Mr. Kane. They turned to find a well-dressed man approaching, accompanied by two others who had the look of hired muscle. "I'm Theodore Blackwood," the man said, and Samuel recognized the name Catherine Dalton's lawyer, though this wasn't the same man who'd visited the ranch. "Mrs. Dalton sends her regards." "Does she—" Samuel's hand moved toward his gun, but the Denver streets were crowded. Violence here would bring immediate consequences. "She's concerned about your mission here. Wellington has friends in Denver, too. Word of your arrival has already reached him." "Let him know we're here. We've got nothing to hide." Blackwood smiled thinly. "Admirable. But Wellington doesn't play fair. There's already a story being spread that you murdered Dalton in cold blood, that you've kidnapped the Morrison sisters. By morning, it'll be in the newspapers." "Whoa," Clara gasped. "That's lies." "Truth doesn't matter if people believe the lies," Blackwood said. "Wellington's offering a reward for information leading to your arrest. Every bounty hunter in Denver will be looking for you by dawn." "Why are you warning us?" Samuel asked suspiciously. "Because Mrs. Dalton genuinely wants Wellington destroyed. He was worse than her husband, in many ways just better at hiding it. She suggests you conclude your business quickly and leave Denver before the net closes." After Blackwood disappeared into the crowd, Samuel and Clara hurried back to their hotel. Samuel's mind was racing, calculating odds, planning escapes. "We see the marshal first thing in the morning," he said. "Then we run. And if the marshal doesn't believe us, then we've lost everything." That night they sat in Clara's room, going over the documents one more time, preparing their case. The city sounds drifted through the window, laughter, arguments, wheels on cobblestones. Life in all its messy complexity. "I'm scared," Clara admitted. "So am I." She looked at him in surprise. "You don't show it. Learned a long time ago that showing fear just makes it worse." He stood to leave to maintain the fiction of propriety. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." "Stay." The word was soft but firm. "Just stay. I don't want to be alone tonight." He should have refused. Should have maintained the boundaries that were already too blurred. Instead, he sat back down and Clara curled against him, her head on his shoulder. They stayed like that through the night, fully clothed, not speaking, just holding each other against the darkness. Dawn came too soon. They dressed, gathered their documents, and headed for the marshal's office. The streets were already busy, and Samuel noticed more than a few hard-looking men paying them too much attention. Blackwood's warning had been accurate. They were being hunted. Marshal Coleman was a large man with intelligent eyes and scarred hands that spoke of violence survived. He listened to their story without interruption, examined the documents carefully. "This is explosive," he said finally. "If true, it implicates half the territorial government in corruption." "It's true," Samuel said. "Every word." "I believe you, but belief and proof are different things. I'll need to investigate, gather more evidence. That takes time." "We don't have time," Clara said desperately. "In 25 days, they'll take our ranch." Coleman leaned back, thinking. Then he pulled out official paper, began writing. "This is a federal injunction preventing any foreclosure action while a federal investigation is pending. It's not much, but it should buy you time." "How much time?" 60 days, maybe 90, depends on what we find." It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Samuel took the injunction, tucked it safely away. As they prepared to leave, Coleman stopped them. "Kane, you know Wellington won't accept this quietly. Men like him, when cornered, they get desperate. And desperate men are dangerous. I've dealt with dangerous men before. Not like this. Wellington has money, connections, resources. He can hire armies if he needs to." "Then I guess we'd better get home and prepare for war." They left Denver within the hour, taking a different route home, staying off main roads. The first day passed without incident, but Samuel remained tense watching their back trail. That night, camping in a grove of aspens, they finally relaxed slightly. "Do you think the injunction will work?" Clara asked, poking at their small fire with a stick. "It'll slow Wellington down, maybe make some of his allies nervous. But Coleman was right, he won't give up." "Then what's the point?" Samuel looked at her across the fire. "The point is we keep fighting. Every day we hold on is a victory. Every small win builds towards something bigger." "You sound like the Reverend." "Maybe he's rubbing off on me." Samuel smiled slightly. "Emma would have liked him. She was always dragging me to church trying to save my heathen soul. Did it work? I thought it had. Then she died, and I lost whatever faith I'd found. He paused, considering. But lately, watching you and Rose rebuild your lives, seeing the town stand together, maybe I'm finding it again. Different than before, but there. Clara moved around the fire, sat beside him. Samuel, what are we to each other? The question hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Samuel could lie, could deflect, could maintain the walls he'd built. Instead, he spoke the truth. I don't know. More than I expected. More than I deserve. You make me feel alive again, Clara. Not just existing, but living. But I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything with it. Just accept it. It's not that simple. The age difference will matter less every year that passes. I can't give you children. I'm too old to start that again. Clara was quiet for a moment. After what Dalton's men did to my mother before they killed her, what they tried to do to me, I'm not sure I could anyway. The doctor in Fort Collins said there was damage. Samuel felt rage rise in him, cold and sharp. Another crime to lay at Dalton's feet, except the man was already dead. I'm sorry, he said inadequately. So am I. But it is what it is. We're both broken, Samuel. Maybe that's why we fit. She kissed him then under the stars and aspens, and he let himself kiss her back, let himself feel something other than grief and guilt. When they parted, both breathing hard, Clara smiled. See, lightning didn't strike us down. Night's not over yet, Samuel said, but he was smiling too. They reached the ranch late the next afternoon to find it in a state of siege preparation. Tom had organized the neighboring ranchers into a militia of sorts. Barricades had been built, supplies stockpiled. Rose ran out to meet them, throwing herself into Clara's arms. Thank God you're back. Wellington's been here twice demanding to speak to Samuel. Tom ran him off, but he'll be back. We have an injunction, Clara said, showing the paper. Federal protection. Good, Tom said, joining them. Because Wellington's hired guns. A lot of them. Word is he's got 20 men camped at his ranch, more coming. Samuel surveyed the defenses Tom had organized. They were good, but not good enough. Not against 20 professional gunmen. We need more help, he said. From where? Tom asked. Everyone who's willing to fight is already here. Samuel thought of Catherine Dalton, of the money she'd offered the town. I have an idea, but it's a long shot. He wrote a letter that night, gave it to Reverend Harper to deliver. In it, he laid out a proposition to Catherine Dalton use some of her money to hire their own gunmen, not for aggression, but for defense. Fight fire with fire. 3 days later, Harper returned with Catherine's response, and something more, 5 men hard-looking but disciplined, led by a man named Frank Morrison. No relation, he said, seeing Clara's startled look at the name. But Mrs. Dalton thought the coincidence might be lucky. We're here to keep the peace, nothing more. You're mercenaries, Tom said disapprovingly. We're professional security, Morrison corrected. There's a difference. We don't start fights, we end them. Samuel studied the men, recognizing their type. They were like he'd been as a ranger men who lived by the gun but within the law mostly. Wellington won't like this, he said. Morrison smiled coldly. Good. The standoff lasted a week. Wellington's men would ride close testing defenses. Morrison's men would make their presence known. No shots were fired, but the tension grew daily like storm clouds building on the horizon. Then Wellington made his move, but not with guns. He arrived with Judge Pike and a territorial sheriff demanding to search the ranch for stolen property, specifically documents allegedly taken from Dalton's estate. You mean the evidence of your corruption? Samuel asked, standing on his porch with the injunction in hand. Pike's face went purple. That's slander, Kane. I'll have you arrested. Federal investigation, Samuel said, showing the paper. You have no authority here until it's complete. That injunction isn't worth the paper it's written on, Wellington snarled. Do you really think some federal marshal from Denver can protect you out here? No, Samuel admitted. But this might. Reverend Harper emerged from the barn with a man none of them had noticed arrive, a reporter from the Denver Post notebook in hand. Gentlemen, the reporter said cheerfully, please don't mind me. I'm just here to document this interesting situation. Federal investigation territorial judges hired guns makes for quite a story. Wellington's controlled facade finally cracked. You think you're clever, Kane? You think you've won? I own this valley. You own fear and greed, Samuel replied. But those are commodities that lose value when people stand together. We'll see about that. Wellington turned to Morrison and his men. How much is Dalton's widow paying you? I'll double it. Morrison didn't even blink. Not for sale, Mr. Wellington. Man has to have some principles. Wellington stormed off Pike and the sheriff trailing behind. But everyone knew this wasn't over. That night, as they all gathered for supper, the ranch family Morrison's men Harper, Tom, and several neighbors Rose stood to make an announcement. I've been thinking, she said, about what we're fighting for. It's not just the ranch. It's the idea that people can stand against power that right can defeat might. Pretty words, Morrison said, not unkindly. But bullets don't care about ideals. Maybe not, Rose admitted. But people do. And in the end, it's people who pull triggers, not bullets. Morrison raised his coffee cup in salute. Wisdom from the mouths of babes. Later, as the others bedded down in the barn or kept watch, Samuel found Clara on the porch reading Emma's old Bible by lamplight. Finding anything useful? He asked. David and Goliath seems appropriate, she said. Small defeating large through faith and a good aim. David also had God on his side. Maybe we do too. Look around Samuel. A year ago you were alone grieving, dying slowly. Now look, friends, family, purpose. If that's not divine intervention, what is? Samuel sat beside her, his hand finding hers. When this is over, we'll figure out what comes next, together. Is that a proposal? He asked, half joking. Maybe it is, Clara said seriously. Life's too short and too uncertain to wait for perfect moments. Remember. Before Samuel could respond, a shout from one of Morrison's men cut through the night. Fire! Wellington's ranch is on fire. They could see it from the porch, an orange glow on the horizon. Within minutes, riders were heading that way. Enemies forgotten in the face of prairie fire, the one thing that could destroy them all. When they arrived, Wellington's ranch was indeed ablaze, but it was contained to one barn. Wellington himself stood watching, his face illuminated by flames, and Samuel suddenly understood Wellington had set the fire himself. Burned with all my records inside, Wellington announced loudly. All those documents you claim proved corruption gone. Terrible accident. It was clever, Samuel had to admit. Destroy the evidence they'd copied, claim insurance money, play the victim. But Wellington had made one mistake. He didn't know they had originals, not copies. Sorry for your loss, Samuel said neutrally. Wellington smiled. Funny thing about fires, Kane, they spread, especially on windy nights. The threat was clear. Samuel felt Clara tense beside him, Rose's sharp intake of breath. Morrison's men shifted hands near weapons. You'd burn the whole valley to win, Tom Bradley asked, horrified. I'd do whatever it takes, Wellington replied. This is business, nothing personal. Everything's personal when homes and lives are at stake, Samuel said quietly. You've shown your true face tonight, Wellington. Everyone here has seen it. Indeed, the crowd that had gathered to fight the fire was watching, listening. These were people who'd remained neutral, who'd hoped to wait out the conflict. Now they saw Wellington for what he was, a man who'd burn it all down rather than lose. As they rode back to the ranch, Morrison pulled alongside Samuel. He's escalating. This won't end peacefully. I know. My men are good, but if he brings in more guns, then we'll face them, like we always do. Morrison studied him. You're not a man who gives up, are you? Tried it once. Didn't take. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor, Marshal Coleman from Denver, accompanied by 2 deputies and a federal prosecutor. They'd ridden hard, arriving weeks earlier than expected. Mr. Kane, Coleman said, dismounting. We need to talk. They gathered in the main room, Samuel, Clara, Rose, Morrison, Tom, and Harper. Coleman laid out what his investigation had found. It's worse than we thought. This Western Development Corporation Wellington's involved with. They've done this before. 3 territories, dozens of valleys. They move in force out small landholders, create monopolies, then sell to the railroad at massive profit. Can you stop them? Clara asked. We're building a case, but we need more evidence, especially now that Wellington burned his records. We have the originals, Samuel said, producing the documents from their hiding place. Everything Catherine Dalton gave us. Coleman's eyes widened. This changes everything. With this, we can bring federal charges. Racketeering, corruption, conspiracy. How long, Chab? Samuel asked. To build an airtight case, weeks, maybe months. We might not have that long. Coleman nodded grimly. I know. That's why I'm leaving Deputy Harrison here. Federal presence might make Wellington think twice. But Wellington was past thinking. That night, as they celebrated the federal involvement with a modest dinner riders, approached not Wellington's hired guns, but townspeople panicked and frightened. Wellington's called a town meeting, one reported. Says anyone who doesn't sell to him by week's end will be burned out. Says the federal government can't protect us all. Samuel stood slowly, decision crystallizing. Then it's time to end this. Samuel, Clara warned, recognizing his tone. No more waiting, no more letting him dictate terms. He turned to Morrison. Can your men handle his 20? With help, yes. You'll have it. Samuel looked around the room at faces that had become family, community, something worth fighting for. Tomorrow we take this to Wellington, on our terms. The morning arrived shrouded in mist that rolled down from the mountains like a premonition. Samuel stood at his window, watching the sun struggle to pierce through the haze, while Clara moved quietly behind him, checking weapons with the methodical precision she'd developed over these months of conflict. Neither spoke of what this day might bring, but both understood that by sunset everything would be decided one way or another. Morrison's men had spent the night preparing cleaning weapons and checking ammunition with the careful ritual of professionals who knew their trade. Deputy Harrison, the federal man Coleman had left behind, paced nervously on the porch, his badge catching what little sunlight filtered through. He was young, perhaps 25, and this was clearly more than he'd bargained for when he'd taken the assignment. You don't have to come with us, Samuel told him, stepping onto the porch with his coffee. I represent federal authority, Harrison said, though his voice shook slightly. If I don't stand with you, what good is that authority? Rose emerged from the barn where she'd been feeding the horses, Tom Bradley at her side. They'd been talking in low voices, and Samuel noticed how Tom's hand lingered on Rose's arm, protective and gentle. Another change these violent months had brought unexpected connections forged in crisis. The other ranchers are gathering, Tom reported. Ben Murphy's bringing 8 men. The Hendersons are coming with their sons. Even old Walter Pruitt says he'll be there. Walter can barely see past his nose, Samuel said. Maybe, but he can hold a rifle and make noise. Sometimes that's enough. Reverend Harper arrived as they were loading weapons into wagons. He wore his black coat as always, but Samuel noticed the bulge of a pistol beneath it. "A armed preacher," Morrison commented, raising an eyebrow. "The Lord helps those who help themselves," Harper replied calmly, "and even Christ drove the money changers from the temple with a whip." "Amen to that," Morrison muttered, impressed despite himself. As the morning progressed, their numbers grew. Families Samuel barely knew arrived grim-faced men and determined women who'd decided that running was no longer an option. By the time they were ready to move, nearly 40 people had assembled, not Wellington's professional guns, but citizens pushed to their breaking point. Clara stood beside the wagon wearing men's riding clothes and Emma's gun belt that Samuel had given Rose, but which Rose had quietly passed to her sister. "Whatever happens," she said to Samuel, "I want you to know that these months with you have been worth everything." "Don't talk like that," Samuel said roughly, "like we're saying goodbye." "Aren't we, to something, at least? After today, win or lose, nothing will be the same." He pulled her close, not caring who saw. "Then we'll face whatever comes next, together." The ride to Wellington's ranch took 2 hours, their procession growing as they passed through town. People emerged from shops and houses, some joining them, others simply watching this final confrontation take shape. The reporter from Denver was there, scribbling frantically in his notebook, understanding that he was witnessing something that would become legend or tragedy, depending on the outcome. Wellington's ranch sprawled across the valley's best land, the main house a monument to greed built with blood money. His hired guns were visible, positioned strategically around the property, rifles glinting in the noon sun. Wellington himself stood on his broad porch, Judge Pike beside him, both watching the approaching force with expressions that mixed confidence and concern. Samuel raised his hand, stopping the procession just outside rifle range. The two forces faced each other across the space tension, crackling like electricity before a storm. "Kane," Wellington called out, "you're trespassing on private property." "We've come to talk," Samuel replied, his voice carrying clearly, "about ending this before blood gets spilled. The time for talk is over. You had your chance to sell. Now you'll lose everything." Morrison rode forward slightly, his men spreading out in a practiced formation. "Mr. Wellington, you're outnumbered. Whatever you're paying these boys, it's not worth dying for." One of Wellington's hired guns, a scarred man with dead eyes, laughed. "You think these shopkeepers and farmers scare us?" "No," Morrison admitted. "But federal prosecution might. You boys want to go down for conspiracy murder, that badge there," he pointed to Deputy Harrison, "means this isn't just some range war, it's federal business now." Samuel saw uncertainty flicker across some faces among Wellington's men. They were hired guns, not ideologues. Federal involvement changed the calculus of risk and reward. Wellington must have sensed it too, because his voice rose desperate and commanding. $50,000. That's what's in my safe right now. Split among you boys when this is done. 50,000. The number was staggering enough to make several of the townspeople behind Samuel murmur nervously. It was more money than most would see in a lifetime. "That's a lot of blood money," Clara called out, riding forward to stand beside Samuel. "But what good is money if you hang for earning it?" "No one's hanging," Pike interjected, trying to assert authority. "I'm a territorial judge. These men are deputized acting under law." "Territorial law," Deputy Harrison countered, his voice stronger now. "Federal law supersedes it, and federal law says what you're doing is conspiracy to commit fraud at minimum, more likely racketeering and corruption." The standoff stretched, nobody willing to make the first move. Then, unexpectedly, one of Wellington's hired guns lowered his rifle. "This isn't what I signed up for," he said. "Fighting federal marshals, count me out." He turned his horse and rode away, ignoring Wellington's shouted threats. His departure triggered something. Two more of Wellington's men exchanged glances, then followed. The arithmetic of violence was shifting, and everyone could feel it. Wellington's face had gone purple with rage. "Cowards! All of you cowards." "Or smart," Morrison observed. "Smart enough to know when a fight's not worth winning." That's when Samuel saw it the moment Wellington broke. His hand went for the pistol at his hip, not smoothly, but with the jerky desperation of a man who'd lost control. Samuel's response was instant, decades of training compressed into a heartbeat. His gun cleared leather and fired before Wellington's weapon was fully drawn. The shot echoed across the valley like thunder. Wellington looked down at his shoulder where red was spreading across his expensive shirt. His pistol fell from nerveless fingers as he sank to his knees. "Nobody else needs to die today." Samuel announced, his gun still drawn, but pointed skyward. "Any man who wants to ride away, now's the time." The remaining hired guns looked at Wellington writhing on the porch, at Pike, standing frozen with shock, at the federal deputy with his badge and the weight of government behind him. One by one, they lowered their weapons. "We're done here," the scarred gunman said. "Wellington, you owe us for 2 weeks. We'll collect our pay and go." "You can't," Wellington gasped through his pain. "I own you. I own this whole valley." "You don't own anything anymore," Samuel said, dismounting and walking forward slowly. Morrison and his men covered him, but it was unnecessary. The fight had gone out of Wellington's forces. Pike tried to run, but Tom Bradley and 2 other townsmen caught him before he'd gone 10 feet. Deputy Harrison was already reading him his rights, the words formal and final. Samuel knelt beside Wellington, who was being tended by Reverend Harper. The wound was serious, but not fatal. Samuel had aimed to disable, not kill. "It's over," Samuel said quietly. "Your scheme, your threats, all of it. Done." Wellington's eyes burned with hatred even through his pain. "You think you've won. The railroad will still come. Progress will still sweep away men like you." "Maybe," Samuel admitted, "but it won't sweep away what we've built here. Community, trust, People standing together against those who would exploit them. Clara had dismounted and now stood beside him, her hand on his shoulder. Rose was there too, and Tom and Morrison and all the others who'd risked everything for this moment. "Get him to a doctor," Samuel told Harper. "He'll live to stand trial." As they loaded Wellington into a wagon, Catherine Dalton arrived in her carriage dressed in black as always, but somehow looking lighter, freer. She surveyed the scene with satisfaction. "It's finished then?" she asked. "This part is," Samuel replied. "There's still the trial rebuilding the town, making sure this doesn't happen again." "I meant what I said about the money," Catherine said. 30,000 for the town. But I want to add something 10,000 specifically for your ranch, Mr. Kane. Call it compensation for what you've done." Samuel started to protest, but Clara interrupted. "We'll take it, and use it to help other families keep their land. Create a fund for those who need help against men like Wellington." Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her face. "Jack would have hated that, using his money to help people instead of hurt them. I love it." The ride back to town was triumphant but subdued. Victory had come, but at a cost, not in lives this time, but in innocence. The frontier was changing, and while they'd won this battle, everyone understood that the war between progress and principle would continue in different forms. That evening, the entire town gathered in what had been Dalton's saloon. The space that had once housed violence and degradation now rang with celebration. Deputy Harrison had wired Denver, and Marshal Coleman had responded that federal prosecutors were on their way to formalize charges against Pike and investigate Wellington's entire network. Samuel found himself cornered by the Denver reporter who wanted every detail of the story. But Samuel directed him to others, to Tom Bradley, who'd found his courage, to Morrison, who'd chosen principle over profit, to Rose, who'd grown from frightened girl to brave woman. "You're the hero of this story," the reporter insisted. "The gunslinger who saved the town." "There are no heroes," Samuel said firmly. "Just people who decided to stand up instead of kneel down. Write about them." As the celebration continued around them, Clara pulled Samuel onto the makeshift dance floor. Neither was particularly graceful, but it didn't matter. They moved together to the fiddle music, surrounded by friends and chosen family. "So what now?" Clara asked. "Wellington's defeated, the ranch is safe. What do we do with peace?" "Learn to live with it, I suppose. Raise horses, build that school with Catherine's money, watch Rose grow up, and probably marry Tom Bradley." Clara laughed. "You noticed that too." "Hard to miss. Boy follows her around like a puppy." "Speaking of following," Clara said, her tone shifting, "Reverend Harper asked if he should stay in town for any upcoming ceremonies." Samuel's step faltered slightly. "Did he now?" "He did. Even offered to waive his fee, considering all we've done for the town." They'd stopped dancing, standing in the middle of the floor, while others swirled around them. Samuel looked down at this remarkable woman who'd walked into his life amid violence and somehow brought peace. "Clara Morrison," he said formally, "would you do me the honor of becoming Clara Kane?" Her answer was a kiss that drew cheers from the crowd and caused Rose to whoop with joy. Even Morrison's tough mercenaries applauded, though they tried to look casual about it. Harper performed the ceremony 3 days later in the small church the town had hastily constructed with the first of Catherine's money. It wasn't fancy rough benches, a simple altar, wildflowers that Rose had gathered decorating the space. But it was full of people who'd fought together, survived together, chosen to build something together. Samuel stood at the altar in his best shirt, the one with only 2 patches, watching Clara walk toward him. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered by the town's seamstress, and carried a bouquet of the wildflowers that grew on Emma's grave. Rose stood as her witness, Tom Bradley as Samuel's. "Dearly beloved," Harper began, his young voice carrying surprising authority. "We gather today to witness something remarkable. Not just a union of 2 people, but a triumph of hope over despair, love over loss, future over past." The vows were simple, traditional, but when Clara said, "I do," Samuel felt something shift in his chest, the last piece of armor around his heart finally falling away. As they kissed to seal the union, Rose whispered to Tom, "Told you they'd figure it out eventually." The reception was held at the ranch tables set up in the yard lanterns strung from posts as day gave way to evening. Catherine Dalton had provided food and drink for the entire town, her final gift, before departing for California, where she said she planned to become someone entirely new. "Thank you," she said to Samuel before leaving. "For killing Jack, yes, but more for showing me that standing up to evil is possible." Morrison and his men departed the next morning, their job complete. Their leader shook Samuel's hand firmly. "If you ever need us again," he said, "send word. This was a good fight. Clean. Don't get many of those." "Hopefully we won't need gunfighters anymore," Samuel replied. Morrison smiled knowingly. "A man like you, there's always another fight coming. It's in your nature protecting those who can't protect themselves. Just remember, you don't have to do it alone anymore." As summer deepened into fall, the ranch transformed. With Wellington's threat removed and federal investigation cleaning out the territorial government's corruption, small ranchers and farmers felt safe to invest in their land again. Samuel's horse breeding program expanded, with Clara proving to have an exceptional eye for bloodlines. Rose took over the ranch's books, her neat handwriting recording their slow but steady prosperity. Tom Bradley proposed to Rose on her 19th birthday, a year to the day after Samuel had saved them from Dalton. The wedding was planned for spring, and Rose threw herself into preparations with an enthusiasm that made Clara and Samuel exchange amused glances. One evening, as autumn painted the mountains gold and crimson, Samuel stood at Emma's grave. The wildflowers had spread until they covered the entire small cemetery, a living memorial that renewed itself each year. "I kept my promise," he said quietly. "I protected them, and somehow they saved me in return." He placed fresh flowers on the stone, then added, "I think you'd like them, Emma. Clara's strong like you were, and Rose reminds me of you at that age, fierce and funny, and absolutely certain she can change the world." He felt Clara's presence before he heard her approach. She slipped her hand into his, standing quietly beside him. "Do you think she knows," Clara asked, "that you're happy again?" "I think," Samuel said slowly, "that love doesn't die. It just changes form. Emma's love lives on in how I love you and how we've built this family, this life." They stood there as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The ranch spread before them, the house warm with lamplight smoke, rising from the chimney horses grazing in pastures they'd fought to keep. It wasn't the life any of them had planned, but it was the life they'd earned, built from courage and choice, and the radical act of standing up when kneeling would have been easier. That night, as they prepared for bed in the room that was now theirs, Clara said, "The doctor in town, the new one who came after Wellington's defeat, he says sometimes his earlier diagnosis can be wrong, about children." Samuel looked at her, hope and fear warring in his chest. "Clara, I'm not saying it will happen, but he says it's possible, that sometimes when a woman feels safe, when her body knows the danger has passed, things heal. And if it doesn't happen," Clara smiled, moving into his arms, "then we have Rose and Tom's children to spoil. We have the ranch to build. We have each other. That's already more than either of us thought we'd have." Winter came early that year, blanketing the valley in white silence. But the ranch was warm, full of life and laughter. The town, freed from fear, began to thrive. The railroad did come as Wellington had predicted, but instead of destroying the small ranchers, it opened markets for their goods. The Western Development Corporation, facing federal prosecution, dissolved in scandal. Judge Pike was convicted of corruption and sentenced to 10 years in federal prison. Wellington, recovered from his wound, was found guilty of conspiracy and fraud. He was sentenced to 20 years, his fortune confiscated and distributed among his victims. The last anyone heard, he was breaking rocks in a federal penitentiary, his expensive clothes replaced by prison stripes. On a cold December morning, Clara found Samuel in the barn training a young colt with patient movements. She watched him work this man who'd been broken by loss and rebuilt by love, and knew she had news that would change everything once again. "Samuel," she said, and something in her voice made him turn immediately. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said, taking his weathered hands in hers. The doctor was right. About healing, about possibility. It took him a moment to understand, then his eyes widened. You mean by summer? A baby? Our baby? Samuel sank to his knees in the hay, pulling Clara down with him, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. A baby, he repeated, wonder in his voice. At my age. Our age? Clara corrected, though she was smiling through tears. And this child will be born into safety, into peace, into a family that chose each other. What if I'm too old? What if... Then Rose and Tom will help. The town will help. We're not alone, remember. We're never alone anymore. They told Rose that evening. She shrieked with joy, hugging them both fiercely. A baby. Oh, Clara, a baby. I'll teach her to shoot. Her? Samuel asked, amused. It'll be a girl, Rose said confidently. This family needs another strong woman. Tom, when told, shook Samuel's hand solemnly, then grinned. Guess that makes me almost an uncle. Guess it does, Samuel agreed. Reverend Harper, who'd become a regular at their dinner table, offered a blessing on the child. May she know only peace, he said. Not only peace, Samuel corrected. Peace is earned through struggle. May she know courage and love and the strength to stand when standing is hard. Amen. Clara said, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. As winter deepened, the ranch settled into new rhythms. Clara's pregnancy progressed smoothly, the morning sickness passing quickly. Samuel found himself planning again, not just for seasons, but for years, decades. A future that included teaching a child to ride to read, to be brave and kind and strong. The story of their stand against Wellington had spread beyond the valley, carried by the Denver Reporter's articles and travelers' tales. Letters came from other territories, from small ranchers facing similar threats, asking for advice, for help, for hope. Samuel answered them all, sharing what they'd learned. That courage is contagious, that standing together multiplies strength, that sometimes the only way out is through. One letter came from Missouri, from a woman whose husband had been killed by land grabbers. She had 2 daughters and nowhere to turn. After reading it aloud at dinner, Clara looked at Samuel. The old Hendricks place is for sale, she said. 20 acres, good water. We can't save everyone, Samuel said, but his protest was weak. No, Rose agreed, but we can save some. Isn't that what you taught us? You do what you can where you are with what you have. Tom laughed. Looks like this family's in the saving people business. There are worse businesses, Harper observed. And so it was decided. They would buy the Hendricks place, offer it to the woman from Missouri. It was the first of many such decisions as their prosperity grew and their reach extended. The ranch became not just a home, but a haven, a place where those fleeing violence or injustice could find shelter and start again. Spring arrived with Rose's wedding, the church packed with well-wishers. She wore Clara's mother's dress altered again and looked radiant. Samuel walked her down the aisle, feeling the weight of the honor. When Harper asked who gave this woman to be married, Samuel's voice was steady and proud. Her sister and I do. The reception was held at the ranch again, but this time there were no guns, no guards, no watching for trouble. Children played in the yard while adults danced and sang. The woman from Missouri had arrived with her daughters, pale and frightened at first, but slowly beginning to smile. Other families they'd helped were there too, creating a community of the saved and the saving. As summer approached and Clara grew heavy with child, Samuel often found himself on the porch at sunset, watching the valley he'd fought to protect. Sometimes Clara joined him, sometimes Rose and Tom, sometimes the Reverend or neighbors or strangers who'd become family. One evening, as Clara rested her head on his shoulder, she asked, "Any regrets?" Samuel thought of Emma always, but the pain had transformed from a wound to a scar present, but no longer bleeding. He thought of the violence that had brought them together. The blood spilled, the prices paid. He thought of all the ways his life had veered from any path he'd imagined. "No," he said finally. "No regrets, just gratitude." For what? For second chances, for you finding me when I was lost, for Rose's courage, for Tom's loyalty, for a town that remembered how to stand up. For all of it. Clara's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. For the baby. Especially for the baby. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink behind the mountains that had witnessed so much loss and finding breaking and building, ending and beginning. The ranch spread before them, prosperous and peaceful, filled with the animals Samuel trained and the gardens Clara had planted and the laughter of those they'd gathered into their unlikely family. As darkness fell and stars emerged, Samuel helped Clara to her feet. She moved slowly now, the baby due any day. Inside, Rose was setting the table for dinner, Tom helping while trying to steal kisses. The woman from Missouri was teaching her daughters a card game. Harper was reading from his Bible to anyone who'd listen. "Ready?" Clara asked. Samuel looked at his wife, at the home they'd built, at the life they'd carved from tragedy and transformed into triumph. "Ready," he said, and meant it. They walked inside together into warmth and light and the simple grace of ordinary life made extraordinary by what they'd survived to achieve it. Behind them, the door closed against the night, but it was a door that would open again tomorrow for anyone who needed shelter, needed hope, needed to be reminded that standing up was possible, that fighting back could work, that sometimes against all odds, the good guys win. The baby came with the dawn 3 days later, arriving with a cry that Samuel swore could be heard in town. A girl as Rose had predicted with Clara's eyes, and what everyone insisted was Samuel's stubborn chin. They named her Emma Margaret Kane, for the daughter lost and the wife long gone, but never forgotten. As Samuel held his daughter for the first time, his hands that had held guns and reins and dying men now cradling new life, he whispered the same promise he'd made to another Emma long ago. "I'll keep you safe. I'll teach you to be strong. And I'll show you that standing up for what's right is always worth it, even when it's hard." The baby's fingers wrapped around his tiny but strong, holding on with the tenacity that seemed to run in this family of fighters. And Samuel Kane, who thought his story was ending, realized it was just beginning again.